All right, so today we're gonna dive into something that's, well, kind of crucial in the world of Canadian immigration.
It can be a real lifesaver, actually.
Reconsideration requests. I mean, I know you're already familiar with immigration stuff, but, when IRCC hits you with a refusal, sometimes it feels like, bam, that's it.
Like a brick wall.
Yeah, exactly. But what if I told you there's a way to, like, maybe smash through that wall?
That's where reconsideration requests can really come in handy.
That's what we're unpacking today, not just like what they are, but how to actually make them work for you. We've got this awesome guide here, and there's this court case, it's kind of recent, that's seriously shaken things up.
A lot of people, they just take the refusal and
Yeah.
they don't realize they have this tool.
Right.
A good reconsideration request, though, that can be a real game changer. But it's not just about saying, hey, I don't like your decision. It's more than that.
For sure, it's not like a magic undo button. So let's get into it. What it really takes to get IRCC to take a second look. This guide, it keeps mentioning grounds for a request. What does that even mean?
Think of it like you need a good reason, something
Yeah.
concrete. It can't just be that you disagree with them. You got to show them they messed up somehow.
Yeah.
Like they missed some important info or things have changed big time since you first applied.
So it's about proving they need to take another look.
Yeah. Prove that there's a real reason to revisit the whole thing.
Give me an example then. What kind of mistake, is big enough for them to reconsider?
Let's say they missed a super important document you sent them. It's a clear case, right? Or maybe there's new evidence you couldn't give them before. Something that changes the whole picture.
Okay, so it's about showing them either they got it wrong or the situation itself is different now.
Yeah.
But what about humanitarian and compassionate grounds?
Oh, yeah.
That's something I hear about a lot, but I'm not always sure what it means.
The H&C factor, right?
Yeah.
This is where things get interesting. It's like
Yeah.
you bring in the human element, all that stuff that's not just, checking boxes and meeting requirements.
Okay, now I'm interested. Give me an example. How could that actually, change their mind?
All right, imagine this. Since you applied, things have gotten really tough. It's not your fault, but it makes it really hard to go back home or, build a life here. Or maybe there's a kid involved and the original decision, well, it doesn't think about what'll happen to them.
I see.
Those are the things that can make a difference. They can tip the scales, even if, you didn't tick every box at the start.
So it's like saying, look, the rules matter, but life happens. And you got to take that into account, too.
Yeah, you got it. And that's also why it's super important to know what can actually happen when you make a request. It's not just a yes or no thing.
I was just thinking that. It can't just be they reopen my case or they don't. Right?
Exactly. Sometimes they do reopen it. And then
Yeah.
they might ask for, updated documents or more info. Or they might just straight up approve it.
Really?
Oh, yeah. But of course, they could also just say no. They could just stick with the original decision.
And what about the ROA? What if they just ignore you? Does that happen?
Yeah, for sure. And that's when it gets frustrating, right? Because you're just left hanging, not knowing what's what.
So being ignored is bad. Always.
Usually. But sometimes, believe it or not, it can work out in your favor.
Wait, how does that work?
Well, if they take too long to answer, it can. It opens the door to something called judicial review. It's basically taking your case to a higher court because they're not doing their job.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But we'll get into that later.
Yeah.
For now, let's, there's this term in the guide. It's Latin. Sounds scary. Functus officio.
I've heard of that.
Have you?
Yeah.
What do you make of it?
Oh, I don't know. It just sounds intimidating. What is it all about?
Don't let the Latin scare you. It's basically just a fancy way of saying that once a decision maker, like an immigration officer, makes a decision, they can't just change their mind on a whim.
Okay, but if they already decided, does that mean they can't reconsider anything?
That's where things get interesting. There's this legal case, Canada Citizenship and Immigration v. Goel. It dealt with this exact thing.
Oh, wow.
And the court basically said, functus officio, yeah, but it doesn't mean immigration officers can never reconsider.
Okay.
It's not like a total roadblock. They didn't give a super clear list, though, of exactly when they should reconsider.
So there's some wiggle room.
Yeah.
But how do you know if you're in that wiggle room, like when reconsideration is actually possible?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
Well, IRCC, they realized this was a bit of a gray area, so they made some guidelines, especially for those H&C applications, the humanitarian and compassionate ones, just to clarify things.
So these guidelines are like, what? A secret decoder ring for figuring this out?
More like a roadmap, I'd say. They highlight the stuff that makes reconsideration more likely. And, some red flags that might work against you. They give you a peek into how IRCC thinks about these requests.
All right, I'm hooked. Tell me, what are these factors that might make them say yes to a reconsideration request?
Well, a big one is procedural fairness. Did the officer follow all the rules when they made their decision? If they didn't, you've got a good argument for reconsideration. Then there's, like we talked about, new evidence, new information that wasn't available before that can totally change things.
And I'm guessing if they made any obvious errors, that helps my case, right? Like
Yeah.
if they clearly misunderstood something.
Oh, absolutely. But there's a catch. Whatever evidence you give them, it's got to be reliable and material, is how they say it.
What does that even mean, though?
It means it can't just be like rumors or vague statements. It needs to be solid, believable, and it has to directly relate to your case.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's the good stuff, the things that help you out. But let's flip it around. What can actually make them LSS likely to reconsider? Like, what are the warning signs?
This is important. Sometimes it's the little things that trip people up. A big one is time. Like, how long has it been since they said no? The longer you wait, the less likely they are to look at it again.
So if it's been years, am I just out of luck?
Not necessarily out of luck, but it definitely doesn't help your case.
Hmm.
Makes them wonder why you didn't say anything sooner.
Right.
Another thing that hurts is if they think you weren't totally honest in your original application, or even in your reconsideration request. If they even suspect that, it's a big problem.
Yeah, I get that. Honesty is key.
And one more thing, if you've already gone through a judicial review, like you challenged it in court, and the court said they were right, well, it's going to be really tough to get them to reconsider at that point.
So pick your battles. Don't waste time on a request that's not going anywhere. Know when you have a strong case.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, about actually submitting your request.
Yes, how do you do that?
Is it just as easy as emailing the officer who handled your case?
I mean, that would be nice.
It can be that simple, especially if you've already been talking to them through email. But usually, it's better to use the IRCC web form. It's made for these requests.
Yeah.
Make sure it goes to the right place, and gets documented properly.
Okay, web form is usually best, but what about the actual content of the request? Like, how do you make it really strong and convincing?
This is where being clear, concise, and polite really matters. Remember, you're not arguing or complaining, you're making a case. Think of it like you're trying to persuade them with logic.
So even if I'm frustrated,
Yeah.
stay professional and stick to the facts.
Exactly. And always highlight anything humanitarian and compassionate, especially if it applies to you. Things like hardship, family separation, the best interests of a child. Those really make an impact because it reminds them that there are real people and real lives involved.
That's a really good point. It's about the human side of it all. The impact beyond just the paperwork. Okay, we've covered a lot what these requests are, the different reasons for them, what can happen, and how to submit them. But there's that one thing we haven't gotten to yet. The Goel v. Canada case you mentioned. This is the one that's supposed to be like a total game changer. Right?
Big time. Goel v. Canada is a landmark case, really changed the landscape of these requests.
Wow.
It gets at a big issue, the fact that IRCC officers historically have had a lot of leeway when it comes to reconsideration.
Okay, now I really want to hear about this. Why is this case so important, and how has it changed things for people applying? Like, what's the backstory?
So in the past, officers could pretty much decide whether or not to even look at a case again. And a lot of people got rejected just because IRCC wouldn't even consider their new explanations or evidence. Goel changed that. In this case, the problem was that IRCC misunderstood a document. They thought a marriage certificate was a marriage license.
Wow, so they said no just because of that.
Yep.
That seems crazy unfair.
Right. And when the person tried to explain through a reconsideration request, IRCC just ignored them. They just repeated their original decision.
So they didn't even consider the explanation.
Nope.
Ugh, that's so frustrating. What happened then? Did they just give up?
Luckily, no. They took it to court. And that's where things get interesting. The federal court, they ruled that what IRCC did was unreasonable. They said, hold on, you can't just dismiss someone's explanation without even looking at it. It was a big win for applicants.
So because of this case,
Yeah,
IRCC has to take these requests more seriously now.
you got it. That's the idea. And here's the kicker. Goel didn't just say that IRCC may reconsider, like Goel. It said that in some cases, they have to reconsider. It's not optional anymore.
Wait, so if they misunderstand something in my application, I can actually use this Goel case to make them reconsider? That's huge.
It's a powerful tool, that's for sure. But of course, it's not that simple. You still got to make good arguments and build a strong case. Goel gives you a good legal foundation, but you still got to do your part.
Okay, so how do I actually US's this case? What can I do?
First things first. If they misinterpreted something, you got to mention the Goel case in your request.
Yeah.
Straight up.
Got it.
Explain how Goel shows they have Louis to review your explanation. They can't just brush you off.
So it's like saying, hey, I know my rights.
Exactly. And if they try to reject your request without really addressing what you said, you can point back to Goel. Tell them they're being unreasonable, might even need to take further action, like that judicial review we talked about.
So it's like a shield protecting you,
You could say that.
backing you up with the law. This is amazing. So Goel really is a game changer for anyone who gets a refusal because of a misunderstanding.
Definitely. It reinforces the idea that IRCC has to take these requests seriously when there's a good reason to think they made a mistake.
Okay, we've covered the legal stuff, but let's get down to the nitty-gritty. What's the very first thing I should do if I get a refusal? Where do we even start?
The most important thing is to understand WHY. They said no. Don't just glance at the letter. Really break it down. What reasons did they give? What did they say you were missing?
So it's like being a detective.
Kinda, yeah.
Look for clues to figure out what they're thinking.
Exactly. Once you know the main issues, you can make your request super specific. Like, if you were missing documents, explain why and include them now. If it was a misinterpretation, like in Goel, explain the right interpretation with solid evidence.
So each case is different. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
It's about being strategic and understanding your specific situation.
You got it. Generic requests, they rarely work. Show IRCC you get their concerns and you're giving them a direct response.
Yeah.
That's way better than just saying, I think you're wrong.
That makes sense. But what if the reason they give is really vague or just seems unfair? Like, I can't figure out what they're getting at.
That's where knowing the rules and guidelines comes in handy. If the officer didn't explain the refusal clearly or didn't consider everything they should have, you can and you should point that out. Refer back to the program delivery instructions. Remember those?
Yeah.
Highlight how important it is that they're fair and they do a thorough assessment.
So hold them accountable, but nicely.
Of course.
Right.
You're trying to persuade, not fight.
Yeah.
Now, about new evidence.
Oh, yeah.
We talked about it a bit before, but I want to hear more about what it actually is and how it can change things.
Yeah, tell me more. Is it just like brand new documents you didn't have before? Or is it more than that? How do you know if it's strong enough to really make a difference?
That's a great question. New evidence isn't always about brand new papers. Think of it broader. Maybe your original application was missing key details about your situation or things got misunderstood. Maybe your situation's changed since then, a health issue got worse, your family situation changed, or maybe you've accomplished new things professionally.
Okay, so it's not just random papers.
Right.
It's got to be stuff that actually addresses the refusal and makes your case stronger.
Got it. And remember that reliable and material thing we talked about?
Yeah.
It needs to be believable, checkable, and actually relate to your case. A nice letter from a friend, it's nice, but it doesn't have the same impact as, say, a doctor's report or something official.
Quality over quantity. Choose carefully.
Right. And speaking of choosing carefully, let's circle back to the humanitarian and compassionate stuff.
Oh, yeah, good point.
We touched on it, but I want to really dig into how to use it in a reconsideration request.
I'm glad you brought that up. I think this is where people get stuck.
Yeah.
It's not obvious how to show those H&C elements in a way that IRCC will actually care about. Like, what are some real examples where those factors could change their mind?
It's about showing that your situation is, special, that it needs extra compassion. Like, imagine you've gone through something really tough since you applied, like a serious illness or, even persecution. That could make it really hard to build a life here or dangerous to go back home. That's a strong agency argument right there.
So it's about showing the real impact of their decision, not just the rules. What other situations would that apply to?
Keeping families together is a big one. If separating your family would be really hard on everyone, especially if there are kids or vulnerable people involved, that's a really strong reason for reconsideration. IRCC is supposed to think about what's best for the child.
Mm-hmm.
So if their decision would hurt a child in some way, physically, emotionally, developmentally, that's a huge agency consideration.
It's about reminding them that these are real families, real lives, not just numbers and regulations.
Right. The H&C provision is there so they can look beyond the strict rules and see the bigger picture, the human impact. It's about fairness and compassion.
I love that. Now let's talk about something that I think worries a lot of people. Making a mistake in their request. What are some common mistakes? Like, what could hurt my chances?
One big one is using a generic cookie-cutter request.
Mhm.
Don't just copy something from the internet or be vague. Take the time to write a good, personalized request. Something that specifically addresses your situation.
Okay.
Make it clear and easy to understand. But make it personal, too. Let them hear your voice, your story.
So it's like applying for a job. You wouldn't send the same resume to everyone.
Exactly. Treat your reconsideration request the same way. And don't forget evidence. Another mistake is not giving enough evidence or using weak evidence. Remember, you got to convince them they were wrong the first time. And strong evidence is the best way to do that.
So it's not enough to just say it, you got to prove it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And lastly, don't be afraid to ask for professional help if you need it. Immigration law, it can be complicated, and a good consultant or lawyer can guide you, make sure you're saying the right things, and avoid making mistakes that could hurt your chances.
That's true. Sometimes it's worth having an expert in your corner. Now, what about lawyers and legal stuff? When should someone actually get a lawyer involved in this process? Is it always necessary, or are there times when it's especially helpful?
That's a really common question. The good news is you don't have to have a lawyer for a reconsideration request.
Okay.
If you feel comfortable doing it yourself and the issues aren't that complicated, go for it. You can totally handle it on your own.
So it's like doing your taxes. Some people do it themselves, others get an accountant.
Yeah, perfect analogy.
Yeah.
But just like with taxes, sometimes professional help can really make a difference. Like if your case has complicated legal issues or you're having trouble understanding the refusal reasons or maybe you're just feeling overwhelmed, a lawyer can be super helpful.
They can walk you through it all and make sure you're doing everything right. But lawyers can be expensive. What about people who can't afford that? Are there resources for them?
Legal fees are definitely a real concern. But remember, a lawyer can increase your chances of success. It's an investment in your future. And thankfully, there is help out there. Some lawyers offer cheaper consultations, and there are nonprofit groups that can give you legal aid or refer you to affordable services. Don't be afraid to look into those.
That's good to know. So let's peek behind the scenes at IRCC. What actually happens when they're looking at a reconsideration request? Is it just like a bunch of people stamping papers?
Oh.
Or is there more to it? What's going on back there?
It's easy to imagine them as a faceless bureaucracy, but it's more than that. When they get your request, the officer is supposed to really look at your arguments and evidence. They have to consider the laws and policies and weigh all the factors in your specific case.
So someone is actually reading those requests?
Yes, absolutely. While they have to follow procedures, there's also room for human judgment.
I see.
They're looking at whether your claims are believable and deciding whether to reopen your application, ask for more info, or stick with the original decision.
That's good to know. Yeah.
It's not just a machine. There's still room for human understanding.
There is. And that's why it's important to tell a good story, not just a dry legal argument. Make them connect with you. Help them understand what their decision really means for your life.
Make them see you as a person, not just a case number.
Exactly. Now, for the big question, what if, after all that, they still say no? Is it really over, or are there other options?
I think that's what people are most afraid of, like hitting a dead end. What would you tell someone in that situation?
A refusal is tough, yeah, but it's not always the end. It depends on your situation and what kind of application it was. There might be other things you can do, like appealing to the Immigration Appeal Division, the IAD.
Okay.
For some applications, like family sponsorship or refugee claims, you can appeal to them. It's a more formal hearing, so you get another chance to make your case.
Gotcha.
Or you can try for a judicial review. If you think IRCC made a legal mistake or didn't treat you fairly, you can challenge their decision in federal court. That's more complicated, usually needs a lawyer. So there are different ways to fight back.
Yeah. The system has checks and balances to make sure things are fair. It's really important to know your options. And don't be afraid to ask a lawyer for advice.
That's really good to know. So we've learned a lot about reconsideration requests.
We have.
From the technical stuff to the importance of never giving up and fighting for what's right.
Absolutely.
What's the one thing you want listeners to take away from all of this?
I want people to know that they're not helpless.
Yeah.
Even though immigration can be scary, you know, they have rights, they have choices, and they have a voice.
Yeah.
Knowing what to do, that's power. And I hope this deep dive, it's given people the info and the the confidence to deal with the system, effectively.
I think so. This has been so helpful. We've covered so much, the details of the request, the whole idea of not giving up and fighting for what you believe in.
It's been great to talk about this.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's given people some hope, some sense of what's possible. The journey can be tough, but tons of people have made it through the system and achieved their dreams.
That's true. And on that note, a huge thank you to all our listeners. We hope this has been helpful and you feel like you can take action. Remember, you're not alone in this. There are people, groups, experts who can help you. So keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep fighting for your goals. Until next time, happy deep diving.